Freedom's greetings, Helldivers. Erevin here to bring you a breakdown on the new gear in the Chemical Agents Warbond and Buff Divers 2. The game is just coming off the back of its most important patch ever, and it's probably the most fun the game has ever been. With player counts on the rise and a new Warbond delivered, things look like they are on the come up, but I do have some relatively unfortunate news when it comes to the new additions to our arsenal today. Helldivers is no stranger to underperforming war bonds, but chemical agents, from the time I've managed to have my hands on it so far, if I were to rate all 7 war bonds from best to worst, this one would probably be the eighth for me behind whatever comes out in 2 months. I'll put it that way. So let's take a long, close look into why I regrettably have this to say about the new warbond. First off, we'll talk about the stim pistol, as this is likely to be the most disappointing factor for most stim enjoyers. This pistol, modeled after the Senator with a 6 round magazine, speed loader on empty, and 24 spare rounds, totaling at 30 stims, sounds like it would be a dream come true for stim junkies the world over for sure. But there are some very serious issues with this first ever support based sidearm. First off, the rounds travel extremely slowly due to it being a dart gun. This makes it extremely hard to land a stim on an ally, especially with how staying still in this game is likely to result in your death more often than not, unless behind hard cover or far from any bugs. It's exceedingly hard to land shots with this pistol on a moving target, especially if they are also ragdolling through the air. Second, we have the durability factor of our Helldivers. The latest balance patch, while it was almost entirely W's, did have one pretty significant L, and if you've been wondering why you feel so squishy the last couple days, it's because generally, no matter what armor you normally wear, you're taking about 15% more damage than you were yesterday everywhere, but your head, which now takes about 25% less than what you were used to. This in itself is something I can live with due to our enemies now having all time low TTKs. We now do as well, improving the pacing of the game overall, and I can definitely write this change off in my mind thanks to that. However, the reason I bring this up is combat in Helldivers is extremely fast paced now more than ever. You die near instantly and far more often than not too quickly for anyone to react accordingly and hit you with a dart gun from any real distance. The vast majority of deaths that transpire around you with this pistol equipped will never really be able to be doing anything about it in reality, making it a waste to bring along. Not to mention, most Helldivers, and when I mean most, I mean almost all, are just going to stim the second they take any damage themselves. But what if you bring an ally in Marshmallow Man armor and try to keep him juiced with stims as they tank the enemy down with their MG? Well, that's not really going to work out either because these stims don't actually heal like our real stims. They heal about 3 times slower, although they share a duration, and only heal about 50 health per stim. This healing is far too slow to outpace any real incoming damage, even considering these stims do give you the 20% damage reduction and speed boost from the experimental infusion booster. There's also the problem of being ragdolled and aim punched while trying to execute this strategy, making it non viable. If this hasn't convinced you of the issues with the sidearm already, the stims from this pistol do not impart any stamina regeneration and cannot be used on yourself no matter how you might try to angle the dart, nor can they be injected into yourself. I know a lot of folks were hyped at the idea of a medic gun in Helldivers 2, but it's just not going to go the way you'd hoped running this thing, I'm sad to say. Helldivers 2 just really doesn't facilitate that medic-y kind of gameplay you likely crave with such low TTKs for the player. Anyway, let's move on to the Tox 41 Sterilizer and Tox Guard Dog, which are fundamentally the exact same weapon. Let's get the ugliest part of this support weapon and guard dog out of the way first. The sterilizer has the lowest DPS in the entire game as far as raw damage, even if you add the gas damage over time into it. The raw DPS of this weapon is, at its peak, just 48 damage per second with an armor penetration level of 5. To put this in perspective, the dagger laser pistol was just buffed to have a raw DPS of 250. So this support weapon that you paid a stratagem slot and support slot for is being outpaced by a laser pistol by a factor of 5. Yikes. So that means the gas damage over time effect does a lot of damage then, right? Well, no, unfortunately not. Arrowhead reworked gas damage in the Buff Divers update, and the logic behind the change was sound in itself, but the nerf to the damage was a severe one, cutting the damage over time down from 50 raw damage and 50 durable damage to 25 per second. Keep in mind as well that damage over time effects only apply to the main health pool of the target and not any limbs. Meaning, if your ideal elimination method involved taking a limb or head off the target, the damage being done here is potentially split, as while heads tend to transfer 100% of the damage they take to the main bodies never transfer any damage to heads. And the same goes for legs and arms, etc. So even if you were incredibly generous and added them both together, we would still only get a damage per second of what, 73. Something so diabolically low that it takes an entire second to even kill a scavenger. And the affliction, as we'll be calling the debuff from now on, does only last 3 seconds after it's applied. This can't be all there is to it, though, right? No, there is one extremely strong and fun factor to this weapon, although it's not enough to turn it around. As I said, Arrowhead has reworked the gas debuff to now cause the enemies to become, quote, confused and blinded. So let's talk about what that means. Enemies afflicted by gas will begin attacking in random directions and moving erratically to simulate a blinding and disorienting effect. This effect does only last 3 seconds unless reapplied, in which case it can be applied indefinitely. The status on its own is quite strong and definitely the highlight of the entire war bond, but the means behind its application and its use cases are where things really fall apart in design. First, the enemy AI will very often attempt to complete their last directive before beginning to play along with the blind. By that I mean blinded enemies that last received the directive to get in range and melee you or leap at you will attempt to do that queued up action before the blind has any effect. Automatons that are set to shoot at you will fire one last time before the blind truly takes hold. In both cases, this does not stop the blind's meager 3-second duration from ticking anyway, and more often than not, puts a delay on the crowd control, keeping you alive throughout the encounter. This is because these weapons only have an effective range of, I believe, 21 meters, same as the flamethrower, meaning you have to be closer than the old arc thrower in order to apply this effect in any amount to your enemy, putting you at a very serious risk at all times while attempting to keep this effect in place to control the swarm. This is especially true because this weapon does not create clouds of gas like the grenade and gas strike do, meaning you have no lingering environmental modifier to play around like the fire, and must continually spray the targets directly within your effective range to keep up the effect. While it does work out at times and can be effective when mixed with the much more powerful fire based weapons, you'll be wondering how much faster and conveniently you could have solved these encounters by just using anything else to eliminate the enemy instead of making them do a funny dance in your guard dog or flames. When it comes to the automatons, using either of these tools becomes a death sentence, as your plan is now to get within 30 meters of Devastators and Hulks. Then keep them all confused while your guard dog ballistic or allies dispatch the enemies, as you'll have no time to swap yourself to a different weapon after applying the debuff if there's more than an enemy or two. Not to mention, the bots are going to still likely get a volley off on you before Affliction truly takes hold, as we discussed, and will not last long unless you keep reapplying it. Once again, we're finding ourselves in a situation where opportunity cost is screaming at us, wondering why we didn't just use something to kill the enemies instead of confusing them and tickling them with damage so low that the dagger would have handled the encounter more than 3 times faster. I will say, however, this affliction is very easy to apply to the enemies, at least. Not nearly as difficult as stun buildup on the pummeler was made to be. Generally, every enemy smaller than a Hulk or Biotitan will be instantly afflicted when exposed to the gas for some theoretical, very powerful crowd control if you have an ally or laser guard dog to follow up. Or if you're running the guard dog, you can follow this crowd control up yourself utilizing your own gear, which is likely the better of the two options. Overall, these tools can be used in combination with other weapons for some very cool feeling combinations in which the enemy will be confused and helpless while being mowed down by your team or other weapons, at least when it comes to the bugs. But it's important to remember we are living in a world where the recoilless rifle is one-shotting every enemy in the game. The autocannon is stronger than ever, and the HMG is turning heavy units into paste. We need to ask ourselves, is this weapon in its current state worth a stratagem, backpack, or support slot? I'm sad to say the majority of you are very likely to answer no within mere minutes of trying this gear out for yourself. We tested every interesting combination we could think of in the time we had the gear thus far, and just could not feel out any big winners to justify such a low amount of damage. I understand the reasoning behind wanting to diversify gas from burning, as the last thing they wanted to do was release a stratagem that was just a flamethrower but better. But even if we are going for the heavy crowd controlling, lower DPS identity for this weapon, I definitely think we could have gone a bit higher on the damage, as the current 50 to 75 just is not reasonable for the weapon this is supposed to stack up against. Considering the post buff flamethrower's theoretical DPS is as high as 800, this weapon could have split the difference at 400, in my opinion, while still not outright replacing the flamethrower, only barely outpacing the torture, which is a primary flamethrower. Some are likely to defend this weapon, saying it's just a crowd control machine, it's not meant to do damage. But that is contradictory to the design of the Blitzer and Arc Thrower. I defended the Blitzer back when it fired half as fast because the enemies I locked down couldn't fight back and died eventually. The arc thrower has low DPS and locks enemies down while killing them slowly. Those weapons still do enough damage to reasonably slay enemies, however. A total of 73 DPS between the weapon and damage over time effect is just far too low, even for a crowd control oriented weapon, and needs to be improved full stop to compete outside a vacuum with other support weapons, crowd control oriented or not. The guard dog variant, I will also highlight, does keep swarmers off you relatively okay, but between enemies queuing up attacks to swing through the confusion towards you, and how the laser guard dog would have just killed them outright with a better effective range, this is only interesting as a charger repellent, as the dog breath can keep a problematic charger permanently locked down for you at point blank. This is a bit too niche to be a shiny example of use case, but it does allow you to melt down a charger using, say, a flamethrower without it charging all over the place at you. There is one decent addition from this war bond in the form of the gas grenade. The gas grenade afflicts any enemy caught within the cloud it creates on detonation. This cloud has a 10-meter radius and persists for 15 seconds, reapplying the 3-second duration debuff to anything within as long as it lasts. This creates an effect basically inverse to what smoke grenades do. While smoke grenades will block the line of sight for your enemies and help you disengage in that way, these grenades cause your would be pursuers to lose control and begin attacking in random directions while caught within the cloud, which can be used as a setup for follow up stratagems or other forms of damage, effectively crowd controlling all those stuck within the, although relatively tiny radius, otherwise completely helpless enemies. This has all the power of a gas strike, but personalized down to a size you can use for priority targets or tightly packed groups for some on demand control, similar to the stun grenade, but with a potentially much longer duration. The only negative to this grenade is, of course, the fact that it deals 25 damage per second, meaning following up here is not a suggestion, it's a demand. Where other grenades like thermite for tanks or incendiary grenades for swarms, as an example, might have just solved the issue outright by applying the longest crowd control effect known to be in the game, called Unalived. If we look past that opportunity cost, though, it is worth noting that this grenade can also not be used to destroy enemy spawners, which is a pretty big shame. Definitely could have used that bit of an extra edge, but I still think this grenade is overall solid for all the same reasons stun grenades have been in the meta conversation since we received the cutting edge war bond. These are solid and a highlight for this war bond for sure. Lastly, the armor itself is likely to be found as pretty unnecessary unless you plan to spend a lot of time within the gas. Unlike fire, the only weapon in this bond creating gas clouds is the grenade. And although you can accidentally spray yourself with the toxin, with only a base damage of 25 per second, you'll be pretty healthy even after soaking up the entire affliction duration with or without the armor, as your damage reductions do apply to this damage. That is about all I have to say about the chemical agents, Warbond, and the weapons within. It feels like a real shame I'm here having to dismiss this new Warbond, as I was extremely excited for this gear in my video covering its announcement earlier this week. These were weapons I very much wanted to be good, especially with the original Tox Sprayer from Helldivers 1 being my favorite bug support weapon. Unfortunately, this just wasn't the case at the end of the day, though. This gear will likely get the buffs it needs in due time, as this stuff was likely just not designed with the buffs we received on the 17th in mind, and currently adheres to the old design philosophy. And the most recent patch was such a massive W, it's difficult for me to care if the new Warbond kinda reeks. I'll be trying to get this feedback in front of Arrowhead as soon as possible, so they'll hopefully get on the necessary changes to this gear sooner rather than later, as it would be a real shame for this Warbond releasing in such a weak state to derail the momentum I was hoping to see Helldivers begin to ride into the future following such a winner of a patch. Thanks for watching till the end, and have a wonderful day. I'll see you next time.
Calling in a hell bomb.
Oh, where did that guy come from?